I know that our whips have a practice of trying to allow 10 minutes after a particular vote, but I'm looking around and I see complete quorum, and I have quietly had a conversation with all of you. I believe everyone has voted, so I would seek as your chair unanimous consent to proceed, notwithstanding the agreement we have as our parties, because we're all sitting around the table. We good with that? Okay, colleagues, happy Canadian Agriculture Day. Lots of stuff happening here on the Hill, and of course we're no exception. And today, let me start by saying that this is meeting number 91 of the House of Commons Standing Committee on Agriculture and Agri-Food. You know all the reminders because we've been through this song and dance before, but today we are continuing our study on the efforts to stabilize food prices, and we have from the CEO of Costco, Mr. Pierre Riel. Thank you, Mr. Riel, for being here, and thank you for your patience through some of our procedural elements that delayed the opening of the committee. Colleagues, I'm going to do my best to try to maintain our time and continue to move. Mr. Riel will have opening comments, and then we will proceed to the first hour of study on C-355 in the name of Mr. Lewis. So without any further ado, I'm going to turn it over to you, Mr. Riel. I know you wanted just a couple extra minutes. That's okay by me as your chair. Go ahead.
Thank you. Bonjour, Monsieur le Président Blois. Monsieur le Premier Vice-Président.
Hello, everybody. Monsieur Blois, Monsieur Barlot, and the members of the committee. As you know, because of its corporate structure being unique, Costco's model is unique from other grocers. We are a membership club, and our membership model allows us to offer products at the lowest possible price. So, through good times, as well as in bad times, our mission has stayed the same: to offer our members the best quality products at the lowest possible prices. That is Costco's business models. You have asked what the grocer's strategy is to stabilize food prices for Canadians. And Costco's answer has always been the same. We will stay true to our business model by offering the best possible prices to our members. We help to stabilize prices and lower the food prices for all Canadians. Our strategy has worked because we offer a value. And because of this, our membership basis is extremely strong and has continued to increase. In the US and in Canada, we have more than 92% of people who are members. Our confidential presentation, which was submitted to committee in November of 2023, we provided in that presentation significant detail about the specific ways that we help as Costco to stabilize and lower food pricing. I want to give you a few examples, but this is not, of course, an exhaustive list. Here is the information that I can share with you publicly. We have invested even more in our employees. We have over 53,000 employees in Canada, up from 48,000 in 2021. Our starting hourly wage was increased to $18.50 in September, which is above the highest minimum wage in all provinces. Our average hourly wage went from $27.63 in 2019 to $30.20 now. It is also important to repeat that 57% of our employees work over 40 hours a week, or full-time rather, and our part-time employees are guaranteed a minimum of 25 hours, but on average work 28 hours. Our Canadian employees, whether they are full-time or part-time, and their dependents have access to healthcare benefits, 100% paid by Costco's. We have among the best defined contribution pension plans in Canada. A cashier who has been with us for over 6 years, makes over $70,000 a year. We are continuing to invest in our Kirkland Signature private label brand, and we have increased the number of items by 12% in the last 4 years. Our Kirkland Signature products offer at least 20% savings to national branded items. We have invested in Canadian suppliers. 61% of our Kirkland signature items are now manufactured in Canada. We have mitigated price increases and accelerated price decreases as input and commodity prices drop, despite the weakening of the Canadian dollar. We are always looking to decrease our prices. For example, since the start of 2023, we have decreased the prices of hundreds of items and continue to do so where we can. We are constantly comparatively shopping with our competitors to ensure we are living up to our promises and offer them the best there is. We continue to look at facing these pricing challenges. The cost of the commodities continues to increase, and the Canadian dollar continues to be weak against the US dollar. And we continue to receive multiple increase announcements from our suppliers. For example, milk minimum prices. This means that we are forced to charge more for milk than we would like to. And this is the reason why we decided to make regular donations to the Breakfast Clubs of Canada. And we have donated over 1.6 million since 2016. With respect to the Grocery Code of Conduct, we live by our code of ethics of obeying the law, taking care of our members and employees, respecting our suppliers, and rewarding our shareholders. In fact, supporting the principles of the code poses no problem at all. We will continue to forwardly review the details of how the code will function
who
day
will
to day, who will participate, how disputes will be resolved, and in the end, how the code will impact food prices.
Parce que les deux langues officielles étaient présentes en même temps. So when I was listening, I was hearing both English and French coming through at the same time. I will talk. Oh, it was English and English. Okay. Sorry, English and English. I'm going to continue to talk in English. Well, I guess I was listening to Mr. Riel and the English translation and maybe getting them both mixed up. I'll continue to talk in English for a few minutes and peut-être je vais présenter quelques mots en français.
Perhaps I'll say a few words in French. Can you hear me now?
Sorry, Mr. Riel, to take your time away. You still have another 45 seconds or however time.
So,
okay, it's good.
If you don't mind, I would like to go back to the Code of Conduct.
Go right ahead.
My comment on it, just to make sure that
Parfait.
we're clear about that thing. I think it's a very important subject.
Absolument. Allez-y.
OK. En ce qui concerne le code de conduite du secteur des produits d'épicerie,
with respect to the Grocery Code of Conduct, we live by our Code of Conduct and our Code of Ethics, which require us to comply with the Act to take care of our members and our employees, to respect our suppliers, and to also pay our shareholders. In fact, this Code of Conduct is not an issue for us. We look forward to reviewing the details of how the code will function day to day, who will participate, how disputes will be resolved, and in the end, how the code will impact food prices for the Canadian public. Costco is invested in the communities in which we operate. We continue to open new stores, what we refer to as warehouses, hire new employees, pay good wages, and support local suppliers. Costco is committed to our mission and ensuring that we offer the best quality at the best possible prices. Thank you very much. Thank you, Mr. Riel. We have time for questions. I'll turn it over to the Conservatives to begin. Ms. Rood, 6 minutes. Please go ahead.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chair, and thank you, Mr. Riel, for being here today. Mr. Riel, the Prime Minister had summoned the grocers to Ottawa last fall, and I'm just wondering if you could tell us if you were part of those meetings last fall.
I was part of one meeting with Minister Champagne.
Excellent. And I understand that the government gave a list of asks to the grocers to help reduce grocery prices for consumers, and I'm just wondering what specific recommendations did you ask the Liberal government to initiate, and have any of those recommendations been acted upon?
You know, Costco point of view and my personal point of view on this is I think we all need to work together. I think there's a lot can be done to help the consumer across the country. It started by the infrastructure in Canada, and I think we have some work to do. I think the rail is something can be improved. Port can be improved. I think if we all sit together and work on it, I think the consumer is going to benefit from it. That was my main suggestion to the minister.
So the government promised Canadians that they would lower food prices by Thanksgiving, and we know that they've broke that promise. And we heard from other CEOs that they had instituted a price freeze over the Christmas holiday period and into the new year and extended it. And I've heard from suppliers that some of them are not allowed to ask for price increases, regardless of whether their costs have been going up. So my question is, did you participate in those price freezes like the other retailers do? And how much do you anticipate food prices, how much do you anticipate they're going to increase in 2024?
At Costco, we don't freeze prices. We work with our supplier, you know, and we negotiate with them. So if they come to us, you know, 2 weeks before Christmas, we're going to be a little bit tougher and say, you know, let's wait because it's not a nice gift for consumer. But we don't freeze price. If we can decrease price because the currency go down, we do it the day the currency come down. So for us, it's not a practice. The practice is best possible price every day, and that's what we do because we're selling a membership, and we're about the sales. So our member trusts us to negotiate the best deal. So you cannot freeze price for a couple of months in our.
Are you seeing cost increases from your suppliers? The requests coming to you at this point?
And there's more and more coming.
More and more coming. Okay. Well, we know, Mr. Rial, that front of pack labeling is going to cost $8 billion to consumers, and we've actually heard in this committee that the new plastics ban on fresh produce is going to cost the industry at least $6 billion. So given your business model, and I know there's a lot of it in your stores, what will this do to the food costs and food availability and food waste?
But you know, we did not do yet an evaluation of the exact, you know, incremental. But anything you try to do, you know, on things, then it's not basic thing, then obviously the cost of the goods going to increase and the retail price will increase. So that's another thing that we need to work all together. Mandating things, you know, and not looking at the effect on the consumer, to me, it's something we all need to look at. And that's what we do at Costco on a daily basis.
So will that plastics ban affect the cost of the food in your store? Do you anticipate the cost to increase on what you're selling?
I think it will in certain cases. I think produce is a waste thing, can be a problem with it. The CPMA had come up and with some study and saying that it's going to increase by 30% the waste. So we'll see. I think we still need to evaluate it. But everything that you add to the net landing costs, consumer will have to pay at a point in time.
So on that same point, but as cost increases for suppliers, and you've mentioned that suppliers are asking for cost increases, what do you think the effect of the carbon tax is on the cost increases that you're seeing at the retail level? Because we know that the carbon tax is a significant cost to our farmers and our producers, and it's going to increase again on April 1st. So have you seen an effect on your business of the rise of the carbon tax and the cost of doing business and the cost to pass on to
because being a low
emission
at this point, we're not the one paying it, but we're paying in our utility bills. We're paying it in the propane we're selling. We're paying it in a different way. So everything that you have to put in your expense at a point in time, you have to. If you want to pay your salary, you want to pay your expense. It's all part of the net landing cost.
You know, another complaint that I hear from many businesses is how our regulations incur costs, which must be passed on to consumers, which you just mentioned. The cost of your utility bills. Obviously, when you see an increase in heating your stores, you're going to have to pass that on to the consumer somehow, whether it's in cost increases on memberships, in your case, or cost increases on the food that consumers are buying. Again, with the potential plastic packaging ban, how do other regulations that are mandated by the federal government affect the costs that you pass on to Canadian consumers? And if you don't have that at your fingertips, is that something that you can pass on to this committee at a later date?
We'll look into it, and we'll get back to you on this.
Am I done? Have you seen an increase in your trucking costs and getting food to your warehouses since the carbon tax has been put on and we see it increasing?
There is fuel surcharge in the market.
So it's a direct cost, the carbon tax?
Yeah.
Thank you.
You know, we're paying our gas for our own fleet, so.
Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. We'll now turn to Mr. McDonald from Prince Edward Island. Prince Edward Island, over to you, my friend.
Thank you, Chair. Thank you, Mr. Riel. Mr. Riel, we've brought grocery store chains before us, and I'm just wondering, in your point of view, why are we here? How did we get to this point? Why are we having to call grocery store chains before parliamentary committees to discuss pricing mechanisms?
I think the consumer is worried out there. And I think you represent the consumer. So I think that's why we're sitting here. And we also represent our own members. So for us, you know, everything we can do to lower price, it'd be better business out there. And more consumer than can afford, you know, to buy their food, better is going to be for the Canadians. And that's what it's all about. So for me, in my very honest opinion, let's work together on this.
Yeah. So Costco, how will Costco ensure that its pricing mechanisms aligns with its own code of conduct? Because you spoke relevant to that, and I just want to know, how will you interpret the new code of conduct to build it into the fairness and transparency that you presently discussed in your preamble?
You know, in our practice on a day-to-day business, we're seeing a supplier as a partner. At the end of the day, we're just selling goods. That's what we do at Costco. So if you don't have a partner, and if you don't have procurement, and you don't have the supplier to supply you, what are you going to sell? So it's important for us and supplier make some money. Because at the end of the day, if they don't, they're not going to be able to supply the consumer. And we're basically in the middle of the two. So we have to do a good job serving the member, and we have to do a good job negotiating with our vendor to make sure we get the best fair price out there. So that's what I call respect. Yeah. And I think if we respect vendors, code of conduct will not necessarily mean to be a necessity because you can deal with it.
So just on these, well, obviously the supply chain, I'm just wondering, you know, we talked about climate change and transportation and so many other things that are happening around the world. How is Costco affected, or how are their pricing mechanisms affected by if it's flooding in California for romaine lettuce or something to that effect? Like, what effect, or can you give us any indication on some of the travesties that we're seeing around the world are having an effect on farming and the farming community, and then obviously your supply chain to your stores?
It's getting tough out there because of all of this. You know, you mentioned rum and art. You know, that's an item. Then probably in the last 5 years, you're out of stock a couple months a year because you know all what happening. Obviously, when there's no offer out there and there's not enough product, the tendency is, you know, it's a little bit more expensive, and that's just a common practice. Having said that, what we've been doing at Costco, we're searching, you know, across the world to try to get the fruit and vegetable to serve our customer. I'm in charge of international for Costco. I was in Australia last week, and, you know, with our buyers over there, communication with the buyer in Canada to try to find some source of product. I was in China 3 weeks ago. There's things we can look to supply even from Canada. Now we're shipping some product out of Canada to those countries. I think that's the key. The key in the future is the procurement. And if we want to feed our kids, we're going to have to work all together again.
Yeah. So overall, the code of conduct promotes transparency, integrity, and you talked a little bit about that. And it also talks about accountability. So what do you see as important for and regulations or policy in regards to the grocery store chains on ensuring accountability across the board for all retailers?
I think it's each of the retailers to be responsible to treat people well. I don't think you need a regulation to do that. I think common practice is treat people fair and you get something back, you know. Fairness is very important in this business. I've been 37 years at Costco, and, you know, are we perfect? No, we're not. and I will never say we are. But I will say that if there's a problem, we want to do the right thing. So if a vendor have a problem with us, he has to call us and we'll sit and we'll deal with the problem. And I think each of us should do the same.
Okay, thank you, Chair.
Okay. Thank you very much, Mr. McDonald. We'll now turn maintenant Monsieur Parent pour 6 minutes, s'il vous plaît.
Mr. Parent, 6 minutes. Thank you very much, Chair. Thank you very much, Mr. Riel, for being here today. I know that you're a very busy man. We appreciate your availability, and thank you very much for your clear and concise answers. I'd like to come back to this code of conduct. You said, and I've been listening to the exchanges you've had with the other members of the committee, that each grocer is responsible for treating people well, that at the end of the day, a code of conduct isn't so much a necessity because you will respect your business model that contains a code of ethics, all of this. I understand that, and I've also observed that in your answers. Also, it's similar to what other witnesses have said, but perhaps a code of conduct may be required for other food chains. And in your previous appearance here, you said that you agreed with the idea of having a code because although it doesn't change much because you have already put in place these kinds of practice, I'm simply wondering whether you still agreed to signing a code of conduct if we can come to an agreement. If we can come to an agreement because we're applying the principles, if these principles are upheld, and I say that if we have a proper protocol in place, but if there's a dispute, we understand how we can come to resolution. But at the same time, we need to understand all of the costs that will be tied to this. Because right now, from what we've heard at the committee, because we were not involved from the beginning, we were not asked to be involved in the beginning. We were involved through the RCC, the Retail Council of Canada. But from that point onward, in our minds, if it's very well defined and the principle consists in respecting our suppliers, we cannot say the contrary because we do this already. So we would say yes, in theory.
So suppose that Loblaws were to sign and Walmart, what would be Costco's approach? Would they sign a code that doesn't cover 100% of the industry? No, I don't think so. I think the code applies to the entire industry. It doesn't matter which players participate. The industry has to participate. So there are codes of conduct right now in other countries where we operate. For example, in England, where we're not asked to, but in England, it's a regulation that people have to. We didn't ask to be a participant. There's also a code in Australia. We don't participate. We already offer about 25 or 30% savings compared to our competitors, and we're not being asked to participate. When not all the players are at the table, I don't call that participation. You don't think that it could have a domino effect ultimately? When they present us everything that's in it, the day that we say yes, it's because we're going to be aware of everything that's going on there. At the moment, we don't have enough detail to be able to say whether or not we will go with it. It would be premature to say today that we will participate when we don't have all the details defined. Nevertheless, I can take it for granted that, tell me if I'm overinterpreting what you're saying, but you've talked about your philosophy and the respective members and all that. We can take it for granted then that if there is a code that is brought in, whether it's voluntary or for everyone to sign, or whether it's brought in by law, that Costco would participate with no problem because it would be good for the industry. And I almost want to ask you, as you said earlier, you keep an eye on the prices of your competitors and all that. You're also aware of what goes on elsewhere. And I think it might be a good thing for everyone for it to be brought in. And I'm sure you agree with that. Correct me if I'm mistaken. Well, I think we agree, but we still need more detail because there's still some work to be done. That's my answer to that. Now, finally, transparency, Mr. Riel. It's been asked, and you've also been asked. You may remember the first time that all the representatives of the grocery chains appeared before us, and the Competition Bureau was doing a study at the same time. And what provoked that study was substantial profit increases in food chains. And when we ask questions to the people who are present before the committee, we say, yes, but it's not because of the grocery prices that we raised our prices, our profits, it's because of pharmacy and all that. And when we looked through to see if that's true, we were told we could not get the numbers because of competitive reasons. So then we asked each representative to give the numbers to the Competition Bureau, and everyone said yes. A few weeks later, I received a report from the Competition Bureau, and then the first page it said that they complained that they didn't receive the numbers from everyone. So my question is simple: did you provide the numbers? We provided what we were able to provide at the time it was asked for, and if the Competition Bureau wants to call us in to provide more, they're welcome to do so, because we worked on that act, and it might be. But I understand that you provided some numbers, but maybe not everything that was asked. I cannot say that because at one point, if you receive something and doesn't fulfill what you're asking, you call back and redefine it, and we see what we can do. But you have to understand that we're a public company. We'll do what we can to cooperate as we always do. We don't have anything to hide. But there are 5 main retailers, so there's competition, and we want to make sure that the same thing applies to everyone too. Did you provide what was asked? In according to our books, yes. But if the Competition Bureau thinks we didn't, they can get back in touch with us. Very good. Thank you. Thank you very much. And now, Mr. McGregor, for 6 minutes, please.
Just on the subject of the costs from transporting goods for your company, I think around this day, diesel prices in my neck of the woods is hovering around $1.70 a liter, compared to about a year and a half ago when it went up to $2.30 a liter. I guess your company has noticed similar fluctuations?
Yes, absolutely.
Absolutely. And then if you compare to the pre-pandemic price of fuel, I'm sure you've seen a great change as well.
Absolutely.
Yeah. It's interesting to note, just to the Conservatives' point, that those price increases have happened at a rate much greater than the carbon tax, and also at the same time when oil and gas companies are reporting record profits. It's just something to put on the record. Anyways, I wanted to move on to my questions here. I want to congratulate you because, first of all, I know that your company is membership driven, so people make an active choice to get a membership and to shop there. And, I think we've seen the results. I think you were recently voted Canada's most respected grocery retailer. We saw Loblaws fall to 13th. We saw Sobeys drop to 9th. Why do you think Canadians are losing faith in companies like Loblaws and your competitors?
I can talk about Costco. I'm not here to talk about the other. I will say about Costco, we're working very, very hard. Our team on a daily basis look at what can we do to basically gain and maintain the trust of our members. The model, when somebody decides to pay, as you said, to come and shop somewhere, you have to offer something. So if you don't give them the pricing and the quality, why should they pay to come and shop? So that's the basic of our philosophy, and the basic of our concept. So, and we're going to continue, the best we can to do that on a daily basis. I will say the utopia of Costco is to be able to sell merchandise at cost and make some money with the membership and other things. But that will be the best, If we can do that one day, that's the utopia, and it will be good for us. Not easy to do, but that's what we're aiming for.
And Mr. Réal, in your opening comments, you, correct me if I'm wrong, you said that a starting wage of Costco is $18.50 an hour, and that the average wage is $30.20 an hour. With some of your competitors, we've noted that some of their employees have had to go on strike because they can't even afford to buy the food where they work. Some are having to, bolster their food purchases with trips to the food bank. It was reported in the news that your competitor Sobeys had recently offered a 5-cent raise to their minimum wage employees. What goes through your mind when you see that kind of trouble in your competitor's labor market pool, and the fact that their employees are struggling, they're having to fight for even a nickel raise? How does that compare to the employees that work at Costco?
Again, I can talk about the employee at Costco. And, we're very fortunate to have the employees we have. I will not be sitting here today without my employees. Costco will not have millions of members in Canada without the employees. During the pandemic and all that, our employees were there at the front end, at the cash, stocking the floor, day in, day out, to make sure the consumer get the food. And I tell you one thing, thank you to our employees. Without them, there's no need up here. And it's essential for us. So everything we can do to give back to our employee, we'll do the best we can.
And do you, you talked about the benefit plan that's available to them, full health care benefits, a defined contribution pension plan. Have you ever, and I'm just curious, have you had any reports from employees that are struggling with day-to-day living? Like, are any, even at the starting wage, struggling with the cost of living and able to get by on that wage where they live?
Our warehouse manager, we have roughly about 250 employees per store. And our warehouse manager are very close to people. So, if we hear something, we'll do our best to help. Our employees are our family. For us, it's like a member. You need members to get employee, you need employee to get members. And one of those two things are essential. And, nothing is eternal life. We have success because of them and because of our members. So we need to maintain that relation. And if we hear something about an employee suffering, we'll do our best to help that employee. And, and if there's some out there, then, we're not, I invite them to call us. We'll do the best we can to help them the best we can again.
And I also want to ask a question on the Grocery Code of Conduct. That, of course, is a big topic for this committee. And, we've heard the noises that both Walmart and Loblaws have made with respect to the code. And now the conversation is transitioning from a voluntary code to a mandatory code. What is your feeling on what the federal government should do next if we have this reticence from two of your competitors? And like, how do we step in as legislators, as policymakers, to make it a fair code for everyone? Like, in your opinion, does everyone have to be a part of this code in order to make it a fair place to compete in Canada?
I do believe that if there's a code, everybody should be in. And that's also include multinationals, because we're talking a lot about the retailers, but we also need to talk about, the suppliers. They're part of that because, this was brought to the attention of everybody based on some supplier having some difficulty with some retailer. So having said that, you need two to dance. So I think you need everybody to be participate, and all of us should look at it as beneficial for the consumer. And I think it will be way better if everybody participate than if we have a law to make that happen.
Okay.
That's my opinion.
Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. McGregor. Thank you, Mr. Riel. Colleagues, just to give you a sense of how we'll finish the rest of our day, I am going to do the second round, so we'll do 5, 5, 2.5, 2.5. That should take us to about 12:10. If there's any final burning questions, I'll allow for a minute, quick intervention from any of the Liberal Conservative side, and otherwise we'll then move on to Mr. Lewis's bill. So we'll go to you, Mr. Epp, for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and thank you, Mr. Riel, for appearing today. And I'm going to continue to thank you for your knowledge of the status of the Grocer Code of Conduct in Australia and in the UK. We had another retailer appear at this committee who professed no knowledge of the workings of code in other jurisdictions, which I must admit I found rather incredulous. So I appreciate your knowledge and sharing that. If I understood from your testimony, Costco is obviously a member of the UK and participates?
No, we're not. We were not asked to be part of it because in the UK, we're more we're working under a license called commercial license, so we're more dictated to the trade business, and then to be able to operate store, we need to have a trade license, which is a different approach.
Right.
So everybody then do 1 billion and more. That's the way they were selecting in the UK. The last one to come in was Amazon and a couple of others, which we were not asked to do it. But our code of ethics apply in every country we do business. So for us, the principles are there.
Right.
So I think if a vendor will think that we need to be there, they will probably do what they have to do to force us to get there.
Right. I also heard from your testimony in Australia, where it is a voluntary code, you are not participating.
No, we are not
But
because
the same code.
Yes.
Right. You were quoted in an article April 23rd, I believe, April 17th, a year ago, saying that you would participate in the code if the goal of the code was lower consumer prices. And the experience from the UK with the existence of a code has been exactly that. So would you stand by that statement from about a year ago?
You know, I'm standing by the statement, and if it's going to help the consumer, but I think the statement, we need to add a little thing here. We need to define that code. So we don't have that yet. So everybody's talking about a code with a lot of things, and it's not done yet. So it's very tough, you know, sitting in my seat and say, I'm for it, and I don't know all the disputes going to be fixed. You don't know who's going to participate. You don't know if multinational is going to be in. There's things that need to be done prior for a decision to be made, which that doesn't mean we're against the principle. Oppositely, we're for the principle of the code, because that's what we do in our code of ethics. But there's things that need to be defined, and when they present it to us, we'll look at it, and if it makes sense, we'll say yes.
I'll circle back to the multinationals that you raised. Do you find your experience with vendors, basis of the vendor size, to be different? Do you find the relationship with vendors to be more cantankerous or more difficult or more friendly with the larger or the smaller the vendor?
I think it's like a lot of things in life. There's some different in everything.
Right.
But I have to say that if you treat people well, right, and you're respectfully, you know, negotiating, then any vendors will recognize that. Because at the end of the day, you're dealing with human beings.
Right.
So you're not dealing with the name of the company. There's no name of a company without people inside of that company.
Just a
Sorry.
second. I'm going to just stop the clock for a second. I saw Mr. Oh, c'est correct? Okay. I think we might have had just a slight slip in translation, but go ahead, Mr. Rep, back to you.
Thank you.
Okay. So to me, that's the thing. So the respect, when the respect is established between, you know, vendors, there's no size of vendor that matter.
So you would not see the need to carve out exemptions on the basis of vendor size. What I'm hearing you call for is participation by vendors as well as retailers. Am I correct?
Yes,
Okay, and irrespective of the size of the vendor.
I think so.
Okay, thank you. U.S. versus Canada, the level of competition that you would face, would you say that you face the similar amount of competitive pressures from your competitors in the U.S. versus Canada? I'm talking about the retail landscape here.
All right, you know, as Costco, the concept is different because we sell a membership. In the U.S., there is other member club. In Canada, that was one, no longer here. In other country, you also have other ones. So if you compare a membership club, there's more competition in the U.S. Right. If you compare the number of grocery, there's maybe a little bit more, but there's a lot more population. So depends which state you are, which area you are. I tell you, I'm living in, you know, I don't spend a lot of time because I'm traveling the world, but I'm in Seattle for the last 2 years. And there is competition in Seattle like there is competition in Toronto. You know, those massive cities, there's massive competition. There's more store because there's more population.
What advice do you have to this committee? Are you participating in the code discussions right now?
No.
Okay, you're waiting. Did you participate?
No, we did not participate in the code. We were informed through the RCC. We asked them questions. And the RCC, there was what we know about it is that was a consultant hire. And now the committee is 2 members of the RCC, which, without naming them, Metro and Sobeys, and RCC members. And then we're waiting for them to come back to us to see what's going to happen. But we were not invited to be part of that committee.
Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
We'll turn it over to Ms. Taylor-Roy for up to 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and thank you, Mr. Rial, for being here. And I appreciate your code of conduct, your ethics that you have in Costco. And I know you've been cooperating and working with the government. Thank you for your submission. But we still are dealing with high grocery costs. And for me, as a representative in Aurora, Oak Ridge, Richmond Hill, that's of great concern to many of my constituents. So that is one issue. The other is for independent grocers who feel that it's very difficult to compete with the large chains. And as we mentioned, more competition, especially in the smaller areas, the smaller regions of Canada, is important. So you mentioned you thought it was very important to work collaboratively with the government to address these issues. And I know we had committed to stabilize prices. Actually, my colleague across the way was incorrect when she said we were going to bring them down. We had said we were going to try and stabilize prices with the grocers. And when I look at many articles that talk about why grocery prices are so high in Canada or have been, I'm looking at one here from CTV, but I've read many of them. things that talks about supply chain issues stemming from the pandemic. It talks about the geopolitical turmoil in Russia. It talks about extreme weather and climate change, as well as many other factors. So when you're dealing with these kind of issues, what do you think we can do collaboratively with the grocery retailers and other players in the chain? As we've mentioned, there's many, to try and bring some more relief to consumers that are struggling right now?
I think, that's a wide question. So
it is.
My recommendation will be for all of us to look, what can we produce in Canada a little more? Mm-hmm. That will be my first thing.
Yeah.
I will say, as a group, if we're all sitting together and we look at variation of industry, and you look at farmers, then you look at secondary manufacturing, mm-hmm. and you look at tertiary manufacturing. I think there's a way to look at it and say, is there something then we can support those small, medium-sized businesses to become a little bit larger, mm-hmm. and to a degree that everybody can sustain. Obviously, that's important. But to me, I think as closer as the product is to the consumer, you're gonna avoid a lot of cost.
Yeah, absolutely.
There's absolutely no doubt. And I think there's a multiple of good thing we have in Canada. This is a great country. I love this country. It's there's a lot of resource. We have a lot of ways of doing things. We have a lot of creativity. We have a lot of nationality around us, which should help us of doing better. We should learn from each other. So I'm a strong believer that if we focus on producing more in Canada, without forcing anybody, just working together, I think there's a way that the consumers will benefit from it.
That's fantastic, thank you. And also the value of the Canadian dollar was impacting grocery prices, so yes. The more we produce here, the better. So you're saying not just farming, but also some of the secondary, tertiary manufacturing as well, and doing more here. Agreed. And of course, that would also help with our climate change issues.
Yes.
The shorter the distance we transport things, the less we have to pay for the rising cost of gas and fuel as well. And so that's one interesting. Do you work to support any Canadian manufacturers or businesses? Like, do you extend it all in your vertically in your
absolutely
in your chain?
We do. In our Kirkland Signature, for an example, the detergent Kirkland Signature made in Canada is exported to China right now. Mm. Okay, we opened 6 stores in China this year. We're going to open a 7th one in June, and the Kirkland Signature detergent is made in Canada.
Okay, great.
The maple syrup is probably one of the best example. Mm-hmm. We're the largest seller of maple syrup in Japan.
Right.
And that's all coming from Quebec, Yeah. And it's a Kirkland Signature maple syrup. And that's the way you're going to help those industry to develop a little larger. And then we're coming well known. And it's not just Costco, it's the producer also. And I think there's a way to get efficiency from it. And at the end of the day, it's going to be better price.
And one last question is just on the independent grocers. In small, we value small businesses in Canada. We value local services and our downtowns. A lot of them are the local independent grocers. What do you think can be done to help them compete against some of the larger chains that are right now dominating the market?
But I think, again, there's a variation in the way we do business, when you're when you're a smaller grocer or you're in a smaller town. I'm from a small town. And, when I go back to my town, I'm trying to buy locally. And the reason is not just to make sure that you support your community. You get a different approach, you know your people, and that. So those independent grocers, I think they serve well what they do, because at the end of the day, they serve the member, they take the time with the customer. I call it member, that's obviously in my language. But having said that, I think it's something to be closer to the consumer will help everybody. And then I often have a question, and when Costco go and open in a small city, like we're going to be in Rimouski, we're in Sudbury, we're, in those small towns. Are you competing with them? I think we're helping them because they can come and buy from us, at a better price, and we sell the goods. And we had proved that across the country, operating in Chicoutimi, operating in Grand Prairie, operating in Medicine Hat, operating in some size city, then we can support everybody.
Thank you. I'm not sure my independent grocers would agree with, with wanting, but I understand what you're saying. Thank you.
Maintenant, Monsieur Parent, 2 minutes 30 secondes, allez-y.
Mr. Perron, 2 minutes and 30 seconds. Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman. Thank you, Mr. Riel, for the clarity of your answers. I would love to get clear answers in the next few minutes. It won't be embarrassing, don't worry. At the beginning, you said that you are faithful to your business model. You gave us confidential document back in November. Was there anything new in those documents? Can you explain to the members of the committee your usual practices? Well, we're always new because it's an original concept. But since the minister has asked, is there anything new? I want to get back to that, because we are receiving you now as a guest for the second time. We'd already carried out our study and drawn certain conclusions, and that we realized that we needed to have a code of conduct. And now we've done this work again at the minister's request, who asked us to receive you to see if you had made any efforts to lower the prices since his request. And in fact, what you're saying is that you've already lowered them to the maximum and you can't do more, but you are continuing to do what you have always done. Is that what I understood? Yes, it is our business model. We can't sell a membership card if we had prices that are equivalent to our competition. So the request of the minister hasn't changed anything. Well, no, it assembled people, it gathered it created a kind of a cohesion. Well, it enlightened us somewhat. Well, perhaps to some people. I am faithful to my vision. So you also mentioned a little while ago that you would need a bill in order for a code of this kind to work. Is because if not everybody can adhere. No, I didn't say we needed a bill. I just said it would be better if everybody functions together, because to force people, I don't think that's a winning thing. So Madame Roux talked about plastics, and this is just an extra question to the subject. In Costco project, we often see there are several layers of plastic in your products. Do you have a working group to work on this, to reduce packaging? You have 10 seconds. Yes, we have been reducing. I'll give you an example. A roasted chicken, it used to be in a kind of a dome, and now it's in a recyclable bag, because this dome was in pallets because you couldn't crush it. Now it's inside of a bag, and we're doing this all over the world. And so I saw this in Taiwan, and now it's all over the place. So these are examples. Yes, we're reducing our plastic use, because it is an effort that we must make, an additional effort.
Thank you very much, Chair. I think, Mr. Riel, it's safe to say that Canadians are quite hyper-focused on the price of food these days. And you know, we do have some worrying statistics in Canada showing the extremely high rate of food bank usage and so on. Recently, you know, Loblaws, in that environment with that hyper-vigilance, they tried to eliminate the discounts that are applied to fresh food that is going to expire soon. I think, you know, their plan was to reduce it from a 50% discount to a 30% discount, because they said they were following what some of their competitors were doing. That provoked widespread outrage, and they were forced to climb down. I'm just wondering, what is Costco's policy on that, on fresh items that may be close to their expiry date? What's your discount policy on that?
There's no discount policy.
No.
When it's close to the date, we're giving to food bank.
Okay.
Or to association and pick up, like everything in a bakery and still have a day left. It's pick up before the presumption. So with that, it's still good to eat. And that's what we do. And we're giving tons of merchandise on a daily basis across Canada.
And do you have an opinion on like what might have prompted Loblaws to have made that decision in that environment, given the hyper focus that many Canadians have?
Again, Mr. McGregor, I'm here to talk about Costco.
Okay, fair enough. We'll leave it at that. Thank you, Chair.
Mr. Riel, I just want to ask one question. You mentioned in Australia it's a voluntary code, and you've talked about the code of ethics that you have in terms of how you deal with your suppliers, and I can appreciate that. Was it of the view that the code of ethics that Costco has was superior to what the code was put in place in Australia, or what would have prevented Costco if you already have really strong ethics in that regard, to not join a voluntary code just because of the view that you already have a lot of those strong principles in place? Was there something in
I
particular?
think in Australia, when that was established, we were, and probably around 10 locations. So our size of business was not as big. And I think what we were already doing, in Australia with our vendor and everything, the needs was not there. What the need will come there if we believe there, then we're going to have to look into it. But at this point, doesn't seems to have a need there.
And in Canada specifically, I appreciate you would have more than 10 stores. You were rhyming off a number of the locations you have across the country. I know you have some in Nova Scotia. I appreciate you haven't been part of the discussions, so you don't have the actual text of the code that is being contemplated. But
we did receive some text,
Okay.
but we're not part of, the committee at this point.
So in the text that you've received to date, because I think this committee really needs to get, we're focused on how we can encourage those larger retailers in the country to join this. We think that this is important. We've heard consistent testimony. You talk about the great relationship you have with suppliers. What is it that would be in a code that talks about just putting some parameters around a commercial relationship of respect and trust that would be concerning from you from a Costco perspective? You mentioned that there's still some uncertainty. You now said you have a text.
I think the dispute part of it, something go bad and somebody brought to the code, a retailer or a vendor brought to the code, then we cannot come to a conclusion of a negotiation or something. How that, mechanism is going to work. And that's what it's not defined at this point, as far as I know. Maybe I missed something, but as far as I know, it's not defined at this point.
What does your code say? You mentioned you have a code of ethics with Costco.
Our code is to do the right thing.
No, but I want to ask. I want to weigh in on that, because if you have a dispute with a vendor right now that provides to Costco, and you guys can't come, what is the mechanism to resolve that dispute?
We do have a vendor agreement. You can get an arbitration, as an example. That's what you can do at a point in time. I don't remember last time we won an arbitration, to be very honest. I think there's something I think it's essential for the committee to understand. As a retailer, if I don't have goods to sell, I'm not sitting here this morning. I need to get the goods, so I need my vendors. The vendors are more important than we may have a tendency to believe, I think. And that's where it changed. The parameters around a vendor, it's you treat them fair, they treat you back fair. And in the same time, you define prices. Because when you define a prices, you define the cost of transportation, the packaging costs, where the product's coming from, the utilities then rise. If everybody can put a menu, what I call a menu net landing costs, and define your costs, and it makes sense, why Costco will say no to the vendor? There's no good reason. So at the end of the day, all of that, it's part of the respect that you build with your vendors. So there is a mechanism, because you always have big vendors, and as a company, then you do millions of dollars in sales, you really have to respect, obviously the contract you have in place. But those things, generally speaking, are solved on face-to-face basis.
And everything you've said and everything this committee, I think, has been able to ascertain about how those conversations are going with the Code of Conduct, I don't think would be mutually exclusive to what your values are as a company. So I guess we'll see where this lands. But thank you, Mr. Riel. On behalf of the committee members, thank you for being here today. And we will let you enjoy the rest of your day and get back to doing the good work for Costco and its members. And colleagues, I'm going to suspend.
Can I just add something?
Go ahead, Mr. Riel.
Okay. I would just like to say thank you again to my employees and my vendors, and also the members. We have millions of vendors in Canada, not millions of vendors, millions of members, roughly 4,000 vendors, and without them, Costco will not exist. So thank you, employees, thank you, vendors, and thank you, members. That's why we're here. Thank you very much,
Mr. Riel. We're going to suspend, colleagues, for just 2 minutes, and then we'll have Mr. Lewis up for 3:55. Thank you. back to order. I know some of you are just grabbing a quick coffee at the back, but we do have everyone in the room, so welcome to the second hour. I better read my notes here in terms of our opening, because we've now switched gears. No, just one sec. One more. Okay, colleagues, pursuant to the order of reference of Wednesday, January 31st, 2024, and the motion adopted by the committee on Thursday, February 8th, 2024, the committee is commencing its consideration of Bill C-355, an act to prohibit the export by air of horses for slaughter and to make related amendments to certain acts. I would now like to welcome the sponsor of the bill, no stranger to this committee, Mr. Lewis, the MP for Kitchener-Conestoga. Tim, Mr. Lewis, good to see you. Of course, this is traditionary where we have an hour of opening panels from the private sponsors, so I'm going to allow you to make an opening statement. And then, colleagues, we are pushed a little bit. I'm going to try to go till about 1:10 or 1:15, which should give us at least 2 rounds, if not more, to ask Mr. Lewis questions, and then we'll go from there. Okay, so Mr. Lewis, over to you.
Thank you, Chair. It feels great to be here in this room, but in a different chair. And also, I'm honored to be here in Ottawa as I appear before you on unceded Algonquin and Anishinaabe territory. And also, today we're celebrating Canadian Agricultural Day, in celebration of the hardworking farmers who feed us. So I'm honored to appear before you, my colleagues in Agriculture Committee, to speak on behalf of my private member's bill, C-355, which aims to prohibit the export of live horses for slaughter by air. As a member of Parliament and a Canadian who values our special relationship with horses, I bring forth this bill, convinced that this practice must come to an end. It's time to Canada to join other countries that have already banned the export of live horses for slaughter. Horses hold a revered place in Canada's history, serving as steadfast companions in our fields and communities. From Mennonite families in my community relying on horses for traditional transportation and for farming to this day, to the iconic images of the Royal Canadian Mounted Police, our bond with these majestic animals is deeply ingrained in our national identity. Every year in Kitchener-Conestoga in the township of Wilmot, our community hosts the New Hamburg Fall Fair, and the first event of the fair is always the draft horse pull event, where the strength and grace of these majestic animals are showcased. These are the same breeds of horses that are being exported for slaughter by air to be eaten raw as a high-end delicacy. However, despite our reverence for horses, thousands are exported by air annually for slaughter, subjected to distressing conditions during transportation. It's unacceptable that these intelligent and sensitive companion animals endure such suffering, especially considering their significant roles in our history and our society. Having engaged in consultations with stakeholders, I've worked hard to understand various perspectives. Bill C-355 specifically targets the export of live horses for slaughter by air, reflecting our commitment to animal welfare, while also acknowledging the importance of farming communities feeding Canadians. Bill C-355 is a standalone piece of specific legislation that will not disrupt other livestock sectors, but focuses solely on banning the export of live horses for slaughter by air. With approximately 2,600 Canadian horses exported for slaughter by air annually, this practice constitutes a relatively small industry. Most exports originate from Western Canada, with horses raised on feedlots before enduring long journeys in cramped conditions. With regards to the timeline to implementation, the bill allows for an 18-month implementation period to align with a natural lifespan of horses raised for slaughter. This 18-month timeline strikes the balance between practical considerations and the commitment to ending this practice as soon as possible. Since the beginning of this practice, I've worked inclusively, considering perspectives of stakeholders from various backgrounds. The bill has garnered support from both sides of the House, reflecting a shared belief in the importance of stopping the practice of exporting live horses for slaughter by air. Canadians overwhelmingly support this initiative. In conclusion, let's work together across party lines and put an end to this cruel practice. I thank you for this opportunity, and I look forward to your questions.
Thank you, Mr. Lewis. We'll get right to that. We're going to start with Mr. Barlow for up to 6 minutes. Over to you, Mr. Barlow.
Thanks, Mr. Chair. Mr. Lewis, thanks for your presentation. Can you tell me what current laws through the Health of Animals Act or the International Air Transport Association Act, what regulations or laws are the current shippers and exporters breaking?
I don't have those laws in front of me, so I cannot.
That's because they're breaking none of the current laws. In fact, they are exceeding them quite handily. In fact, do you know the International Air Transportation Association regulations on the size of the crates that horses specifically should have on air transportation? Do you know the size of those crates through the IATA regulations?
I do. I know that the horses are shipped in containers that are actually smaller than a single stall for a horse.
Well, in fact, the regulations for the IATA requires a 1,300-pound horse to have about 14.2 square feet. Currently, the transportation crates used by Canada are almost twice that much at 22.85 square feet, so they're actually exceeding international rules. Is the Canadian Food Inspection Agency present to inspect each load of horses before transportation?
The Canadian Food Inspection Agency is present until wheels up and the plane takes off.
So if they are being inspected to ensure they meet all the rules, what rules are being broken that would bring the necessity to this bill forward?
I have respect for the Canadian Food Inspection Agency, the work on food safety that they do, the work on animal health, the work on plant health, and they're going to be here to speak about that bill. They've appeared at this committee many times. I look forward to their contributions.
So are they breaking any laws by the CFIA standards?
We'll determine that when they get here. We've got witnesses that are coming with various degrees of opinions.
So in your actual wording of your bill, you're saying that horses are being cramped and uncomfortable, wounded, injured, and fatalities. But clearly, they're exceeding all of the international and Canadian laws in terms of transportation regulations that are in place. CFIA is there inspecting every single load before it is wheels up, as in your wording. So they're not breaking any current laws, which I find interesting of why you're bringing this bill forward if it really is about air transportation. Since the last time the rules have been adjusted in 2014, how many horse fatalities have occurred since 2014? In air transportation specifically? How many fatalities?
How many fatalities have occurred? Yeah. I know that the science we're going to bring people that explain, I don't see how many.
Zero fatalities since 2014. Mm-hmm. Do you know the frequency?
I actually have data that says there were fatalities in 15 and 17, I believe.
Well, according to our own Canadian statistics and the CFIA, the answer is zero. What is the frequency of injured animals on air transportation? Do you know?
I have that number somewhere. But
less than 1%.
Right.
How many stakeholders did you consult with in terms of? Have you consulted with the CFIA? Yes or no?
Yes.
Have you consulted with Canadian Border Services Agency?
I believe we are in touch with them as well. Mm-hmm.
The Airline Pilots Association?
We have reached out to them.
Reached out, so have you consulted with them?
I haven't heard them from
back
from them.
CBSA, so you reached out, but have they answered back?
We have, my staff, I believe, is talking to them as well.
So about close to half of the breeders and you said this is a minor industry. It's minor maybe for you, but not for the folks who are actually in this industry. It's actually a massive part of their livelihood. And I want to read a portion of a letter from members of the Métis Nation of Alberta. There has been no consultation with Indigenous producers and people on the plant to ban the export of live horses. Banning the export of meat horses would be extremely effective if the federal government would like to again shackle Indigenous farmers. For us, the horse meat industry has given us a financial boost to our farming practices, as well as the ability to embrace our Métis traditions and culture. How many members of the Métis Nation across Canada did you consult with before putting this bill forward?
I have had conversations with individuals, and we have meetings set up with, I believe, the Métis Nation of Alberta as well.
How many of them were supportive of this bill?
I have talked to some who are, some who aren't, and I want to say that this bill is a standalone bill that will not stop breeding of horses. It will not stop the sale of horses. This is simply stopping the export of live horses before slaughter by air.
which is a significant part of the industry. You mentioned in your the Amish horses in your riding. What do those owners of those horses do at the end of the lifespan of the horse?
The export for horses for slaughter is not about the end of life of a horse. This is about raising horses, specifically fattening them up to be used as raw, like sushi, for overseas. So that is not the same. That is not the same. It's false comparison.
What is the percentage of the population globally that still relies on horse meat as a key part of their protein diet?
Again, this is not about horse meat consumption. It's not about the sale of horse meat or even raising and breeding horses for consumption here. It's about, this is simply ending the cruel practice of exporting live horses to another country to be eaten raw as a delicacy.
Well, it's 16%. So in your bill, you're worried about the time that horses are transported by air. Do you know the hours that we're allowed to transport cattle in Canada? How many hours is allowable?
We've had that discussion. I believe is it 28, I believe?
It's 33.
33.
What does the law allow in air, how many hours for air transport for horses? Do you know?
That's 28 hours.
28. What is the average air time that they're in the air going from Canada to Japan, for example?
We'll have witnesses come and talk about that. There are some that are under, and there are some instances where they went over the 28 hours.
There's one instance where they went over 28, and that was for weather. They stopped in Seattle. Average is 23. So again, they're below industry standards. The fatality rate is 0. The injury rate is less than 1%.
Mr. Barlow, I apologize. We're at time,
Thanks,
and I want to make sure we have enough room. Thank you, Mr. Lewis. We'll now turn to Mr. Kerr.
Thanks very much, Mr. Chair. I want to take the opportunity just to begin here in thanking my colleague for bringing this important piece of legislation forward. You know, we often live and talk about the Ottawa bubble, and what that means is that there are issues here that sometimes consume a lot of our energy and our time and our focus that are disassociated with the things that people on the ground really care about. My colleague, Mr. McGregor, our colleague, received over 36,000 signatures to a petition in support of the objective of this legislation. In my constituency office, I'm told that we are getting 30 emails about every minute right now, which puts us over 10,000 in the course of the last couple of days. Now, I know that my conservative colleagues like to refer to this as pandering to activists. I do take some exception to the demonization of activists as somehow being flawed in their pursuit of better treatment of animals. But that aside, I don't understand how it is that we can characterize the voice of tens of thousands of Canadians that have been expressed through the democratic process as simply being chalked up to some form of extreme activism. The job of a member of parliament is to reflect the views of their constituents back to folks that do business here in Ottawa. And I respect the fact that Mr. Barlow and my conservative colleagues are, I think, genuinely doing that, reflecting concerns raised by those they represent. I'm doing the same thing, as I believe Mr. Lewis is, Mr. McGregor, and others. When I campaigned during the by-election we held in Winnipeg South Centre in June of this past year, I heard about this issue more than any other that was raised by people at the door and in my office who wanted to see action on something that mattered to them. In part, that is because my riding is not too far from Richardson International Airport in Winnipeg, where a large number, as we know, of these horses are sent for slaughter. I do also have a couple of concerns or perhaps just curiosities about rationale used by my conservative colleagues in particular in opposition to this bill. I did hear my colleague Mr. Barlow talk about the fact that there were no rules broken, therefore why bring forward legislation? I'm not sure that the purpose of legislation is always to respond to a broken rule. Conservatives are bringing forward legislation as it pertains to a price on pollution. I'm not sure that's breaking any rule, but they brought forward legislation that they want to see bring changes to that. I'm also not really hearing Mr. Lewis talk a lot or others talk about broken rules as much as I'm talking about the core of this issue, which is that these are sentient beings that under current regulations, even if rules are not being broken, is not in line with the values that we believe we should have as Canadians. I also don't quite understand the point raised about death and always coming back to minimal numbers of deaths. Of course, assuming that the statistics are true, and I've read them, I have no reason to believe that they're not, that there's a minimal number of deaths. That's like saying if somebody hits a dog but the dog doesn't die, we don't need to worry about it. If somebody abuses a child emotionally, but there's no physical or fatal consequence as a result of that abuse, that it's not something that we should be talking about. So the point I'm simply raising is that just because the horses aren't dying in transport does not justify that the provisions currently in place are good. I know that my Conservative colleagues, much like I think many of us, like to be rooted in evidence, and the evidence certainly suggests, Mr. Lewis, that this is a priority for many Canadians. And I don't depreciate the significant concern that is coming from some folks that my colleagues represent, but that does not mean that there aren't tens of thousands or millions of people across the country who feel differently. And I think sometimes that's being left out of the conversation. I do note that in a comment that was made by our colleague from Dauphin Swan River Neepawa during debate on this not too long ago, that he accused the Liberals as attempting to score cheap political points on the basis of this legislation. With the 30 seconds I have left, Mr. Lewis, I think it's 30 seconds, 45 maybe, can you tell us why you brought this bill forward and why you believe, if you do, that the feedback you've received and that we've received from tens of thousands of Canadians is legitimate? Thank you.
Well, I appreciate the opportunity to answer, and Winnipeg Humane Society has been a strong advocate for banning this practice, and I have to say thank you because your name comes up when we have those conversations as someone who's behind this, so they're lucky to have you, and I appreciate that. The vast majority of Canadians in all provinces, all political stripes, they want to see this practice. Just recently heard from someone in Foothills, Alberta, with Mr. Barlow's own riding, who wants to ban this practice. So this is not some niche issue. This is not urban versus rural. This is not about going against agriculture. This is about banning a practice that's already been banned in other countries, and more countries are working toward this. It's about banning a cruel practice of shipping horses live by plane across the world to be eaten as a delicacy. And I take offense by the member's description of being called niche. This is not niche. This is compassionate. This is Canadian. And we're getting people from all across the country asking us to stand up and do the right thing. And I think that's what we're doing.
Thanks, Mr. Lewis. Appreciate that.
Thank you, Mr. Kerr. Thank you, Mr. Lewis. Maintenant, Monsieur Parent, 6 minutes, s'il vous plaît.
Merci beaucoup, now, Mr. Parent, 6 minutes, please. Thank you, Chair, and thank you, Mr. Lewis, for being available. I know you're always here, but it's in a different way this time. So, do you have the interpretation? Good. So, Mr. Lewis, I'm going to start by asking you quite simply, if these conditions, from what I understand from your bill, because there are people, or you consider that the transportation conditions of horses for slaughter are improper. So Mr. Barlow earlier asked a good series of questions on the regulations. They're not being broken. So is the solution not instead to review the conditions of transport? That's my first question. Thank you for the question. I wanted to speak French, but
next time, promise. I appreciate that concern. We'll bring in witnesses. We'll talk to people about the condition that the horses have from being raised in those feedlots all the way up to transportation. The conditions that these horses are companion animals, different from other livestock. and certainly are not treated the same as horses for racing or any other causes. This is a niche market that can be improved, and there are examples of injuries and deaths.
C'est quoi, Monsieur Lewis, les différences?
Mr. Lewis, what is the difference? What are the differences between the transportation of horses for slaughter compared to horses for racing or for sale, quite simply, to a customer outside of Canada?
Right. The horses raised for sport are trained and habituated to travel, where these horses are not. Those horses that are raised for sport are supervised during the flight itself, and these horses that are raised and exported for slaughter are definitely not. The horses that are raised for sport are also given more space to move within their crates to correct their balance during takeoff and landing, and that's one of the primary possible injuries.
Donc vous me dites que les conditions de transport ne sont pas tout à fait identiques.
When you say that the conditions are not identical, there's more supervision and more space for horses that are used for other purposes than slaughter. You're talking about competition horses. I understand that there's an approach there. And the other thing is, wouldn't it be quite simply to change the transportation conditions to adapt it to what is done when you transport a horse for competition? That's my first question. And the second question is, are there a horse that is being sold for other purposes than slaughter, but not for competition? What are their conditions of transport?
I would imagine we would have to ask the exporters if they would be willing to improve those conditions. That's a question for them. I did have meetings with the exporters themselves. We had good conversations, and I heard their concerns, and that's what we're here to do. We're here to hear each other's concerns. I would imagine it comes down to cost. When you're talking about race horses, those are high-end horses that are treated much differently than basically these being treated the way these horses that are exported for slaughter are. As far as the second question, I'm trying to keep up, please.
Donc, on imagine, on va avoir des spécialistes qui vont nous revenir là-dessus plus tard. C'est ce que
So
vous me
we'll
répondez.
have some specialists talking about this a little later on. So you've also mentioned in your bill the necessity of having a certificate so that the exporter be able to justify the export of a horse and to attest that it's not for slaughter, because your bill is only regarding slaughter. So we are many of us consider horses to be noble and valuable creatures, but we also have to think of the impact of any given bill. So those who are transported for other reasons than slaughter, you talk about a certificate for the exporters. But first of all, have you considered the administrative burden from all the different people involved? And once arrived at destination, that would mean that the owner of that horse, once the beast will be at the end of life, will not be able to slaughter it. How do you reconcile this? Because there will be various periods of time happening.
I've reached out, I've spoken to many stakeholders, and we want to minimize any of those unintended consequences related to any changes in this policy or law. Most of the groups that I spoke to, the racetrack associations and those others, they understand the bill and they're behind the spirit of the bill. These are groups whose primarily they're concerned that they wanted to make sure that there's no correlation between their industries and the exporters sending horses for slaughter. So these are two completely different industries. We're going to make sure that we minimize any kind of extra burden on those industries, and we want to hear from them, and we want to work within this committee to see if we can come up with solutions. But right now, this is, I believe, is a solution that is a standalone bill that will not affect any other livestock, and it's also a bit of a reverse onus saying, if you're proving that you're not sending this horse for slaughter, which is a vast difference. There's not much difference between getting on a plane for one horse that's traveling for a show or go over for a coronation in England versus these horses which are crammed in crates and flown over.
Thank you, Mr. Lewis. Thank you, Mr. Parrell. We'll now turn to Mr. McGregor for up to 6 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and welcome, Mr. Lewis, taking a different seat around the committee this time. Yes, as Mr. Carr mentioned, e-petition 4190, it received 36,175 signatures. It certainly did generate a lot of interest, and my office too, given that I'm the NDP's agriculture critic, we are receiving a considerable amount of correspondence on this bill and this measure. So it is clear that there is a considerable amount of interest among the Canadian population for this measure. I'm curious though, you know, when we started this parliament, we did have a different Minister of Agriculture, the Honourable Marie-Claude Bibeau. And in her mandate letter was a clear direction from the Prime Minister to enact this kind of policy. During the number of times that she appeared before our committee to defend the estimates for her departmental spending, I took that opportunity to ask her a number of times on how she and her department were progressing on that mandate letter from the Prime Minister. And her constant refrain was that they were working on it, more consultations were needed. So similar to Mr. Carr's question on the journey that led you to developing this PMB, I'd like to know a little bit more about that, but also what kind of collaboration have you had with the department? Have they offered you access to the consultations they provided? Because I know the resources of a member of parliament compared to an entire department, there's a considerable difference there. So have you been able to piggyback on AAFC's consultations on this particular policy item?
Thank you for the question through the chair. You've been a big part of getting it this far. I think that it's that public opinion of once people know about this cruel practice, they don't want to see Canadians, Canada, take part in this. So a big part of the grassroots movement of that was to have voices heard. So by you sponsoring petition 4190, I think it is, that brought it to the forefront. And there have been advocates that are saying that the fact that you sit on the Agriculture Committee, the fact that I sit on the Agriculture Committee also, I think, shows that this is not any kind of attack on livestock farming, on the agriculture sector as a whole. This is a specific bill, and that's why I did it as a standalone bill, not to in any way encroach on other legislation. This is a very specific bill for a specific purpose. As far as why I took this on, well, as you and I know, and I would say for those listening, is that we end up with getting a lottery number for a private member's bill. And in the previous parliament, I had one that wasn't worth looking into. This one I did, and it took a little while, and this was something that I wanted to do, and I heard from people. I have been in touch with the department. I don't know how much, like they didn't just hand over a file to me and say, here's where we're at. I know that they were working toward that. I just saw an opportunity to get this done faster. And there's no difference between a private member's bill or a government-sponsored bill. The legality of it is the same, and so I would still love any input from anybody.
Sure. Yeah. No, I was just curious about the process involved, and it's good to hear that you've been in consultation with the department. I think we're going to have a chance to hear directly from them as well. And the other thing I also want to be clear, so on close reading of your bill, this bill, am I correct in reading, it is not about stopping the raising of horses for human consumption. This is really just targeted on the mode of transport. Yes?
Sorry. Yes, it is. This is not going to stop horse breeding. This is not going to stop horse selling. We have horse abattoirs.
And given that there is in some parts of the world they do enjoy the fresh horse meat as a delicacy. Sometimes it's consumed raw. It's a cultural thing. We're not here to pass judgment on that. But given that this is not about banning the raising of horses for human consumption in Canada, do you think there may be some more opportunities to increase local processing and better economic opportunities that result from that in Canada? If we were to ban the export and the transportation of live horses, does that give rise to maybe more processing happening in Canada? Is that
That's certainly a possibility. You and I have both sat on this committee and studied processing, and especially through pandemic, we saw that is a bit of a choke point to get food from farm to table. So, but to reiterate your point, this is not stopping domestic consumption of horse. This would not stop the selling and breeding of horses, and nor do we have any jurisdiction of what other countries are eating or doing. That's not about this. This is, again, cultural respect everywhere. This is simply banning the export of live horses for slaughter.
And my final question, I do note that Senator Pierre Delfond has Bill S-270, which he introduced last year. Did you have any conversations with Senator Delfond, and how did you come to the conclusion to draft your bill the way it is compared to how he drafted his bill?
It was a bit of a horse race.
Yeah, there's so many
It was. You know what? We were both moving around at the same time, and I just got there first. We have had conversations. We even sit on another committee together. So he's been very helpful, and I'm still keeping him in the loop. And we just kind of approached it from a slightly different way. But I wanted to make sure my bill was a standalone bill that didn't affect any other livestock or any other production.
Thank you.
Okay, we're going to leave it at that. We'll go to Mr. Steinley for up to 5 minutes.
I'd really like to begin where Mr. McGregor left off. You just said this is not about banning the consumption of horse meat domestically. Your colleague, Mr. Carr, has talked about horses being sentient beings, and Canadians believe, in lots of correspondence he has received, is about treating horses with respect and dignity they deserve. So I'd like you to tie those two positions together, because many of the emails I've received, like Mr. Carr has said, is about stopping the consumption of horse meat. So I want to make it clear, you just said that is not the aim of your bill.
Yeah, I appreciate you saying that, and I appreciate all the people writing to you to ask to end this practice. This is not. This is a standalone bill that is just simply banning the export of horses live for slaughter.
So with all the people that have sent in emails to stop the production of horse meat and stop the consumption of horse meat, will you be responding to them saying that is not the point of this bill? This bill is to stop the transportation of horses by air to other countries for consumption.
I appreciate the question, and I appreciate you understanding the nuance of that. That is exactly what the bill says it's going to do. I wanted to be specific because that would be the best way to get the most support, and that's what we said we do, and I'm going to do it.
So just to go back to Mr. Carr's comments, because many of the people that he represents wants this practice completely banned. So are you and Mr. Carr not on the same page then of what this bill is supposed to be doing?
When I set out to draft this private member's bill, it was to ban the practice of exporting horses, live horses, for slaughter. That's the intention of the bill, and that's what we're working on and talking about right here.
Okay, well, thank you very much for clarifying that. I guess I do have a list of stakeholders who do not support Bill C-355, and it's something I'd like to put into the record because some of my colleagues have said this is a pan-Canadian approach. There's lots of people across the country that are in favor of this, but there are lots of groups that have questions and concerns about this. So the list includes the Airline Pilots Association of Canada, Alberta Auction Markets Association, Alberta Beef Producers, Alberta Breeders Finance, Alberta Grazing Leaseholder Association, Beef Farmers of Ontario, British Columbia Cattlemen's Association, Canadian Cattlemen's Association, Canadian Equine Exporters Association, Canadian Meat Council, Canadian Federation of Agriculture, Egg Farmers of Alberta, Equestrian Canada, Feeder Association of Alberta Limited, Horse Welfare Alliance of Canada, Livestock Markets Association of Canada, Les Producteurs de Bovins de Quebec, Manitoba Beef Producers, members of the Métis Nation of Alberta, New Brunswick Cattle Producers, Nova Scotia Cattle Producers, Saskatchewan Cattle Producers, Spruce Metals, Prince Edward Island Cattle Producers, Western Cash Advanced Programs, Inc., Western Stock Growers Association. My question is, how many of these groups have you discussed and heard what their concerns are when it comes to Bill C-355?
I appreciate that list. That sounds like it's a very thorough list, and I would have conversations. I've had conversations with some. I would appreciate any of those organizations reaching out to any one of us. That's our job here in committee, is to hear from stakeholders and have those conversations, bring those ideas forward and debate them. So I think...
Thank you. And just to get back to one of the comments that Mr. Carr made when he talked about sentient beings. So I think one of the fears people have is, what's next? If we go after what people decide to eat, are cattle next? Are hogs next? Are chickens next? So I think that's the fear of the slippery slope that some of these stakeholders that have very real concerns about where we're going right now, that would be their concern. And I'm just going to end with this. When you talk to FCC, have they confirmed, because they do have borrows directly that are horse breeders, 40% which are Indigenous, I might add. Farm Credit Canada has confirmed that their clients who operate in the horse industry have borrowed since 2008. If people's livelihoods are prohibited by this law and it's carried through, FCC could be considered a public expense if they no longer are able to pay their debts. So how much money would the taxpayers be on the hook for paying out these horse breeders if this bill goes forward? What's the cost to the Canadian taxpayer?
I appreciate the question, and this bill will not ban breeding or selling of horses. This bill will ban the exporting of those horses to be slaughtered in another country,
which kneecaps the industry.
That is not going to stop this industry from happening. And to answer the other, let me see what your other question was now. Oh, you talked about slippery slope.
Will there be compensation through FCC?
You talked about the slippery slope, but I've already answered the fact that this will not affect the domestic meat industry. And so that is not a slippery slope. This is a standalone bill on purpose to make sure that that does not happen.
Thank you, Mr. Lewis. Thank you, Mr. Steinley. We'll now turn to Ms. Taylor-Roy for up to 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and thank you very much, Mr. Lewis, for introducing this bill, the private member's bill. I know it was a commitment our government has made, and it was going to be fulfilled. I know Minister McCauley is supportive of this, but I appreciate the fact that you put it forward in a private member's bill so it could be dealt with sooner. As Mr. Carr has referred to, and I'm sure as every member on this committee has, I too have received many, many emails from constituents regarding this bill. And there is great support for banning the export of horses. And very specifically, the concern is about how these animals suffer when they are being transported. You know, I rode horses when I was younger. My daughter is an equestrian. In fact, she was educated at Olds College in Alberta in equestrian studies. And she is not only a rider, a show person, but she also works with horses. And I don't think she would ever transport her show horse by plane. You know, we know these animals have a great instinct, the fight or flight kind of instinct. And when they're stressed in a situation like this, it's very, very difficult for these horses. And in fact, I was thinking about what the member opposite said, that there would be no deaths. And I think choosing a date is nice, but in our Library of Parliament notes that were sent to all of us, it does mention that since 2013, 5 horses have died associated with transportation. So it's, and I had actually reached out to the Library of Parliament to gather information as well. So some horses have died, but more than that, many, many, I would say all of them suffer. And I think animals are sentient beings. I would agree with that. And while we're not saying people in Canada cannot eat horse meat, we are simply saying that we do not approve of this practice. And I wanted to mention another thing, which is that the UK actually has introduced a much broader bill. It's actually called an animal welfare bill because they are concerned about the welfare of animals, to ban all livestock exports from the UK. And that was introduced in December 2023. Now, again, they're not banning the consumption of animals. They're simply banning the export of these animals because they understand that that is not in the best interests of animal welfare. So there are many reasons. And I did want to introduce one thing that I found disturbing, which is both Mr. Barlow and Mr. Steinley, when they were making the remarks, referred to members of the Métis Nation who do have businesses. Some of them have businesses in this area raising animals for slaughter, to be transported for slaughter on these feedlots. And I appreciate that that is part of their livelihood. And I understand that that is one way that they are making a living. However, referring to their Métis traditions and cultures as though somehow this is consistent with Indigenous culture and tradition, I would object to that because we all know we should know if we've looked at Indigenous culture and tradition at all, that a key tenet of animal-Indigenous relationships is respect. And I would sincerely question whether there is a great deal of respect being shown of these magnificent animals when they are bred to be slaughtered at the age of 18 months and to be transported in crates for more than 28 hours without any food or water. I did also want to refer to one other thing, which was a question you had about whether any rules are being broken. Because rules are not necessarily being broken, and in some instances we do not know that, because although we have rules, they're often not enforced and they're not checked. Section 146 of the Health of Animals Regulations, which I'm sure Mr. Barlow is familiar with, does prohibit individuals from transporting an animal if it is likely to suffer, sustain an injury, or die. I would suggest that most horses, and if they could talk, I remember Mr. Ed, the talking horse, if these horses could talk, would indicate that they do suffer when they're being transported for 28 hours standing with no food or water, and that often goes longer than that. So as someone who does care about all sentient beings and thinks that we have a responsibility as a government and to our constituents, and once again, I have received thousands of emails from constituents. In fact, one from a woman recently who said she's been waiting 19 years to see this happen, and she's been advocating this for this long. So thank you very much for doing this, and I think it is our job to look at these rules, even if they're not being broken, if they're inadequate to protect the welfare of animals. The one thing I did want to ask you about in particular was some of these, the acts that are meant to protect horses. They fall short of enforcing or even including horses that are raised for slaughter or destined for slaughter by transport for slaughter. For example, the National Farm Animal Care Council published a code of practice for the care and handling of equines, meant to uphold standards for horses on feedlots, but they do not include enforcement or penalties for operators to follow them. And then there's the Horse Welfare Code of Conduct by Equestrian Canada, again, something my daughter belongs to, but they don't even include any horses destined for slaughter. So it seems that horses bred for slaughter often receive less protection. And do you believe that that does translate to a lack of welfare upheld by industry practices?
So, Mr. Lewis, we are, and Ms. Taylor-Roy, I was trying to be generous. We are vastly over time, but Mr. Lewis, if you could quickly summarize, I'll let you go ahead.
I can summarize it by saying I think the length of your question shows your expertise and your care, and appreciate this. And you're not alone. Canadians across the country want this practice to end, so thank you.
Mr. Perron, up to 2.5 minutes.
Merci, Monsieur le Président.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Mr. Lewis. I'm trying to do this very directly, 2.5 minutes. So the idea is that you're not trying to stop slaughter of horses, but you're trying to stop export by plane because these are sentient beings. But all animals are sentient beings. We transport hogs, we transport veal, calves rather, and chickens, and that is why we've established transportation standards. And this brings me back to what I said earlier. If you do not want us to stop eating horse meat, then what is the purpose of developing a kind of status of noblesse, of nobility for horses? So the idea is that you're simply trying to stop the export of these horses by plane. And I think we mentioned it earlier, we spoke about it, but I think the solution is to look at the transportation standards that exist. So if you don't believe that this will not affect other animal production, do you not believe that this is going to create some kind of precedent? The next time around, we're going to say, well, to transport hogs in a truck, there's wind, we will have to review all of these standards. So why should we not, in that particular case, review all of the standards? So I'm having some trouble following you. I really have trouble following on that. So perhaps you could elaborate on that. Thank you.
Thank you for the question. That is the reason that I made this a standalone bill. I did not want, we've had discussions in our committee here about animal transportation, many studies, and that's important that we do that because, again, the CFIA and all of the regulations are making sure animal health is protected, and that happens here in Canada. But this bill is specifically designed to end one specific instance, which is just banning horses for slaughter.
Je m'excuse de vous interrompre là, dans le dernier 30 secondes.
I'm sorry to interrupt you, but in my last 30 seconds, you're saying the point is not to stop it, but you are stopping one type of transport for one particular type of animal. I think we'll have to review all of this. What about the other animals, the sentient as well? It's important that we note that in the committee, that we will not consider less another animal. But in your introduction, you mentioned the noble status of the horse. So S266 might be a better solution, no? Because it bans all modes of transport. Would not be a better option?
Other animals are not transported on planes across the world unattended. That's what's happening with these horses in those containers, in those tight spaces with no one looking after them, more than one in a crate, packed away. That's not the way we're doing things here in Canada. Once that plane leaves, there's no accountability, and that's one of the things that this bill intends to stop.
Okay, thank you to you both. We'll now turn to Mr. McGregor.
Thank you, Chair. I'll just make it brief, Mr. Lewis. One question, just on the points that Mr. Barlow raised. You know, there obviously are some concerns from some sectors of the industry. You know, anytime we make policy changes, it is going to have consequences. What do you think the government's policy should be if this were to become law? What measures could be put in place to alleviate their concerns and maybe help them transition so that they're not having a loss of revenue?
Thank you. That's an important question. And if this bill passes, receives royal assent, there's built in an 18-month implementation. 18 months to implementation. That's going to do a number of things. It's going to also give the chance for the government to respond with whatever regulations they need, to ask the agencies to do what they need to do, to adjust, and it will also give time to account for those horses, because it's 18 months is the lifespan of a horse before it's born and before it's sent off to export by air. So that 18-month grace period will be a time that, and in many legislation does that, comes into effect at a certain date. So so that we want to make sure we have time to do this correctly.
Great, thank you.
Okay, colleagues, that brings us to the end of our hour. Thank you for the ability to extend a little bit. We will be studying horticulture on Thursday. It is the start of our Health of Horticulture in Canada study. So we will see you bright and early, I guess 11 o'clock on Thursday morning. Thank you, Mr. Lewis, and everyone have a great day. Meeting adjourned.